The candles were flickering low and the conversation was effortless. For the first time in 5 years, Mark felt like more than just a tired father in a stained hoodie. He felt seen. He felt alive. But just as he was about to lean in and tell her how much this night meant to him, Sarah's smile vanished. Her voice turned cold, almost defensive, as she looked him dead in the eye and delivered a sentence that should have ended everything. "You can leave now," she said, "because I am a single mom." Mark froze, his heart pounding against his ribs, because Sarah had no idea that he was hiding the exact same secret. The sun was beginning to set over the quiet suburbs, casting long, amber shadows across the driveway where Mark stood, fumbling with his tie. It was a simple silk tie, a deep navy blue that he hadn't worn since his sister's wedding 3 years ago. His hands were shaking slightly, a sensation he wasn't used to. As a construction foreman, Mark was a man of steady nerves and heavy lifting, but today, the weight of the evening felt heavier than any steel beam. In the upstairs window, he could see the silhouette of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, waving enthusiastically. She was staying with her grandmother for the night, a rare occurrence that had taken weeks of planning and a significant amount of courage for Mark to even suggest. Mark had been a single father since Lily was barely 2 years old. His life was a meticulously constructed fortress built around school runs, packed lunches, scraped knees, and bedtime stories about brave knights. There was very little room in that fortress for anyone else, and for a long time, Mark preferred it that way. The world of dating felt like a distant planet, one he had no map for and even less desire to visit. However, his friends had been relentless. They told him he was young, that he deserved companionship, and that Lily would eventually grow up and leave the nest. After months of hesitation, he had finally joined a dating app, though he kept his profile sparse. He didn't mention Lily in his bio, not because he was ashamed, but because he was protective. He didn't want the first thing people saw to be a package deal. He wanted to remember what it felt like to just be Mark for an hour or two. That was how he met Sarah. Her profile was bright and intelligent, filled with photos of her hiking and reading in sunlit cafes. They had swapped messages for 2 weeks, finding a shared rhythm in their jokes and a common ground in their values. Sarah was a graphic designer, someone who saw the world in colors and textures, which fascinated Mark, whose world was built of concrete and blueprints. Tonight was the night they were finally meeting at a small, intimate bistro downtown. As he got into his car, Mark took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of crayon wax that seemed permanently embedded in the upholstery. He checked the rearview mirror, adjusted his collar, and told himself that it was just dinner. It didn't have to be a life-changing event. He drove through the city streets, the neon lights blurring past, feeling a strange mix of guilt and excitement. He felt guilty for leaving Lily, even though she was safe and happy, and excited for the possibility of a conversation that didn't involve cartoons or the complex social hierarchy of the 2nd grade. When he arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, filled with the low hum of voices and the clinking of silverware. He saw her almost immediately. Sarah was sitting at a corner table, wearing a dark green dress that complemented the gold tones in her hair. She looked even more radiant than her photos, but there was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes that mirrored his own. As he sat down, the air between them felt charged with a quiet intensity. They started with the basics, the safe topics of work and hobbies, but the conversation quickly deepened. Sarah was easy to talk to. She listened with an intensity that made Mark feel like the only person in the room. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, the sound rusty but genuine. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams of travel, and the strange twists of fate that had led them to this city. Mark was careful, though. Every time the topic of home life or weekend routines came up, he pivoted. He talked about his projects at work or his love for old movies. He wanted this night to stay in the vacuum of the present. He wanted to enjoy the feeling of being a man on a date, not a father on a deadline. Sarah seemed to be doing the same. She was guarded about her private life, focusing instead on her passion for art and her recent travels. They were two people carefully dancing around the centers of their lives, trying to see if the fringes could overlap first. By the time the main course arrived, Mark felt a genuine connection. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was a sense of peace. He felt like he could finally let his guard down, unaware that the evening was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. As the evening progressed, the initial nerves began to melt away, replaced by a comfortable intimacy that felt far too natural for a first date. Mark found himself captivated by the way Sarah's eyes lit up when she spoke about her latest design project, a mural for a local children's library. He liked the way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, and the way she wasn't afraid to disagree with him about the best way to brew coffee. It was the kind of chemistry that people spent years searching for, and Mark felt a surge of hope that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. However, as the wine flowed and the restaurant grew louder, the reality of his life began to press against the edges of the conversation. He found himself nearly mentioning Lily's recent piano recital when they discussed music, and he had to catch himself before complaining about the sheer volume of glitter that currently resided in his living room rug. Each time he held back, a small brick of tension was added to the wall between them. He wondered if Sarah was doing the same. There were moments when she would pause, a shadow crossing her face, as if she were about to say something important before deciding against it. This mutual guardedness, which had initially felt like polite boundaries, was starting to feel like a heavy weight. Mark noticed that Sarah was checking her phone more frequently as the clock ticked past 9. Her movements became slightly more hurried, her smiles a little more strained. He figured she might be bored or perhaps she had an early morning, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was simmering under the surface. They moved on to dessert, a rich chocolate tort that they agreed to share, but the light-heartedness of the earlier hour was fading. The conversation turned toward the idea of honesty in relationships. Sarah asked him what his biggest deal-breaker was, her voice dropping to a serious tone. Mark hesitated, thinking about the complexities of his life. He said he valued transparency above all else, the irony of his words not lost on him. He told her that life was too short for games and that he wanted to find someone who could handle the reality of a messy, complicated life. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the table. She seemed to be weighing his words, her expression unreadable. The tension in the air was palpable now, a physical presence that made the elegant restaurant feel suddenly claustrophobic. Mark felt a sudden urge to tell her everything right then. He wanted to tell her about the little girl who was his entire world, about the sleepless nights when she was sick, and the immense pride he felt watching her grow. But he was terrified. He was terrified that the moment he mentioned being a father, the magic of the evening would evaporate. He had seen it happen to his friends, the sudden shift in expression, the polite withdrawal, the realization that a relationship with a single parent came with a predefined set of rules and limitations. He didn't want to be a category, he wanted to be Mark. But the silence between them was growing louder, filled with the things they weren't saying. Sarah's demeanor changed abruptly as they finished their coffee. The warmth left her face, replaced by a mask of resolve. She looked at him, not with the affection she had shown earlier, but with a look of braced expectation. Mark felt a cold pit form in his stomach. He wondered if he had said something wrong, or if she had sensed his hesitation and misinterpreted it as a lack of interest. The bill came and they split it in a stiff, formal manner that felt a world away from the easy laughter of an hour ago. As they walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, the silence was absolute. The city noise felt muffled, as if they were standing in a bubble of impending conflict. Mark turned to her, intending to suggest a walk to clear the air, but Sarah spoke first. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying tremor of defiance. She stood under the yellow glow of a street lamp, her hands clenched at her sides. She told him that she had a wonderful time, but that she couldn't do this anymore. She said that she couldn't keep pretending that her life was simple or that she was a free agent. Mark watched her, confused and hurt, as she took a deep breath and prepared to deliver a blow she thought would end their connection forever. The air felt thin as Sarah looked at Mark, her expression a mix of sorrow and ironclad determination. She took a step back, creating a physical distance that felt like a chasm. "I've had a lovely time, Mark," she began, her voice tight. "But I need to be honest with you before this goes any further." I'm not just a woman looking for a fun night out. I have responsibilities that most people my age don't understand. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand, silencing him. She looked like she was delivering a confession, her shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. You can leave now, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I won't be offended. I'm a single mom. I have a 4-year-old son who is my entire world, and my life is not my own. Most men run for the hills the moment they hear those words, so I'm giving you an easy exit. You don't have to call me, and you don't have to explain. Just go. Mark stood perfectly still, the words echoing in the quiet street. The irony was so sharp it felt physical. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion hidden behind her makeup, the fierce protectiveness in her stance, and the flicker of heartbreak she was trying so hard to conceal. She was standing there, braced for rejection, assuming that her status as a mother was a flaw she had to apologize for. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Mark thought about the hours he spent worrying about how to tell her his own truth. He thought about the tie he had struggled with, the guilt he felt leaving Lily, and the fear that he would never find someone who understood the weight of his life. A slow, genuine smile began to spread across his face, one that started in his eyes and transformed his entire expression. He didn't move toward his car. He didn't look away. Instead, he took a step toward her, watching as her eyes widened in confusion. Sarah, he said, his voice low and steady. You think that's a reason for me to leave? Sarah blinked, her defensive posture wavering. It usually is, she replied, her voice sounding small. People want easy. They want spontaneous. They don't want Saturday mornings at the park or early curfews because the babysitter has to get home. They don't want to come second. Mark laughed then, a short, breathless sound that was filled with relief. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his gallery until he found his favorite photo. It was a picture of Lily, covered in flour from a failed baking experiment, grinning widely at the camera. He turned the screen toward Sarah. This is Lily, he said softly. She's 7, she's obsessed with dinosaurs, and she is the reason I almost didn't come tonight because I was too nervous to tell you that I'm a single dad. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It wasn't heavy with secrets, it was light with the shock of mutual recognition. Sarah stared at the photo, then up at Mark, her mouth slightly open. You're a dad? She whispered. Mark nodded, feeling a massive weight lift off his chest. For 3 years, it's just been the two of us, he explained. I didn't put it on my profile because I wanted to see if someone could like me for me first, but the truth is, being a dad is the biggest part of who I am. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. In fact, for the first time all night, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being understood. The wall they had both been building brick by brick all evening didn't just crumble, it vanished. They stood there in the glow of the street lamp, two people who had spent so long guarding their hearts and their children, suddenly finding themselves standing on the same ground. The easy exit Sarah had offered was gone, replaced by a doorway into a reality they both shared. The atmosphere between them shifted instantly from a tense first date to a deep, soulful connection. They didn't go home. Instead, they walked to a nearby park, sitting on a bench under the moonlight, and for the first time that night, the conversation truly began. There were no more pivots, no more guarded answers. They talked about the reality of single parenthood with a raw honesty that only another parent could understand. Mark told her about the terrifying first year after his wife left, the steep learning curve of doing ponytails, and the way Lily's laugh could mend even his worst days. Sarah spoke about her son, Leo, and the challenges of balancing a demanding career with the needs of a spirited 4-year-old. She admitted how lonely it felt to have amazing news and no partner to share it with, or how heavy the silence felt once the house was finally quiet at night. They laughed about the shared absurdities of their lives, the constant presence of Lego bricks in shoes, the ability to function on 4 hours of sleep, and the specialized knowledge of which grocery stores had the best car-shaped carts. For Mark, it was an epiphany. He had spent so long fearing that being a father would make him unlovable to the outside world, but here was Sarah, showing him that his experiences didn't make him a burden, they made him a person with depth, empathy, and strength. He realized that the very things he was trying to hide were the things that made him most compatible with her. They weren't just two people on a date, they were two survivors who had built beautiful lives out of difficult circumstances. As they talked, Mark realized that he didn't have to explain why he couldn't do a late-night movie or why he might have to cancel a plan if a fever spiked. Sarah already knew. She lived that same reality. The pressure to be perfect, to be the fun guy without baggage, melted away. He could just be Mark, a man who loved his daughter and was looking for a partner to walk alongside him. The emotional peak of the night came when Sarah asked him what he wanted for the future. Mark looked at her, seeing the hope in her eyes, and realized he wanted more than just a companion. He wanted someone who understood that his heart was already partially occupied by a little girl, and who wouldn't be intimidated by that. He told her that he wanted a life where they didn't have to hide who they were. He wanted a life where their children could play together while they shared a cup of coffee. Sarah reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlocking with his. "I thought I was asking you to leave to protect myself," she admitted. "I thought if I pushed you away first, it wouldn't hurt as much when you eventually left because of my son. But you didn't leave. You stayed and showed me your heart." The realization hit them both. They had spent so much time being strong for their children that they had forgotten how to be vulnerable for themselves. In that park, under the cold stars, they allowed themselves to be seen. It was a terrifying and beautiful moment of clarity. Mark saw a future that he hadn't dared to imagine. One where he wasn't carrying the world on his shoulders alone. He saw a future where his family could grow, not by replacing what was lost, but by adding more love to the mix. The consequences of their honesty weren't the end of the night, but the beginning of something much deeper. They sat in silence for a while, just holding hands, the weight of their shared truth acting as an anchor. The world felt smaller, more manageable. They weren't just two single parents navigating a difficult world. They were two people who had found a mirror in each other. As the night finally drew to a close, Mark walked Sarah back to her car. The air was crisp, but the warmth in his chest remained. The dynamic had changed entirely. The formal politeness of the restaurant was gone, replaced by a comfortable, quiet understanding. They stood by her car door, both reluctant to let the evening end. Mark felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He realized that his fear of being rejected for his life as a father had been a shadow he had allowed to follow him for too long. Meeting Sarah had turned the lights on, showing him that his life wasn't a series of obstacles, but a series of strengths. Sarah looked up at him, her expression soft. "I'm glad I told you," she said. "And I'm even more glad that you told me. It feels like I can finally breathe again." Mark nodded, leaning against the car. "Me too. I think we spent so much time being just parents that we forgot we're allowed to be people too. People who need connection and love just as much as anyone else." They made plans to see each other again, but this time, there was no pressure to hide the reality of their schedules. They talked about a daytime date at a park where the kids could run around, a suggestion that felt both practical and incredibly romantic. It was an acknowledgement that their lives were intertwined with their children, and any future they built would have to include them from the start. As Sarah drove away, Mark watched her taillights disappear into the city traffic, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. He drove home slowly, the silence of the car no longer feeling empty, but full of possibility. When he arrived back at his quiet house, he went up to Lily's room, even though she wasn't there. He looked at the scattered toys and the half-finished drawing on her desk. He felt a surge of love for his daughter, but also a new sense of love for himself. He had taken a risk, he had been honest, and he had found someone who saw the value in his journey. The lesson Mark learned that night was simple yet life-changing. The things we think make us unlovable are often the very things that lead us to the people who will love us the most. We carry our histories like heavy luggage, fearing that no one will want to help us carry it, but sometimes we find someone who has a matching set. Single parenthood is a path of immense sacrifice, but it also builds a capacity for love and resilience that is unmatched. Mark realized that he didn't have to choose between being a great father and being a man who deserved happiness. He could be both. As the weeks turned into months, Mark and Sarah's relationship grew into the partnership they had both dreamed of. There were challenges, of course. Merging two different routines and introducing the children was a delicate process, but they approached every hurdle with the same honesty and compassion that had defined their first night together. Lily and Leo became fast friends, their laughter filling the spaces that used to be quiet. Mark and Sarah found strength in each other, a soft place to land after the long days of parenting. They proved that a second chance at happiness isn't just a fairy tale, it's a reality for those brave enough to show their true selves. This story is a reminder that you are never too much for the right person. Your past, your responsibilities, and your children are not burdens to be hidden, they are the beautiful, complex parts of the person you have become. Sometimes, the person who understands your silence the most is the one who has been shouting into the same wind. Life has a funny way of giving us exactly what we need, right when we think we're least ready for it. Mark and Sarah both went into that date expecting to be rejected for the very thing they cherished most. But in their vulnerability, they found a strength that only shared experience can provide. If you're out there feeling like your life is too complicated for love, or that your responsibilities make you less than, remember this story. Your baggage is actually your story, and the right person won't ask you to leave it at the door, they'll help you carry it inside. Don't be afraid to be seen for who you truly are. Because sometimes, the person who says you can leave is actually the one who is most desperate for you to stay.